I stared at the table as steaming lobster tails landed in front of every grandchild. One for Mason. The server smiled. One for Chloe. Another plate. Lily. Another. My daughter Emma straightened in her chair, her eyes lighting up as the last silver tray approached. The server stopped beside her. Before she could lower the plate, my brother Brandon casually lifted a hand. Not that one. The dining room seemed to pause. The server frowned. I'm sorry. We didn't order for her. He pointed at Emma, without even looking in her direction. Just bring the fries. Emma blinked. But everyone else got lobster. Brandon shrugged. That's because I paid for my kids. My mother reached for her wineglass, as if nothing unusual had happened. You should have brought Emma something yourself, Mila. A small bowl of fries arrived where the lobster should have been. Every cousin had a fresh lobster dinner, slices of birthday cake waiting beside their plates, colorful gift bags stacked behind their chairs. My 9-year-old daughter had fries. Emma looked up at me with confused eyes. Mom, did I do something wrong? Across the table, Brandon had already started cracking open his lobster. No, I said softly, squeezing her hand beneath the table. You didn't. Several nearby diners had stopped eating. Even the server looked uncomfortable. Still, no one in my family said a word. I took one slow breath. Then I smiled. Thank you, I told the server politely. She looked relieved that I wasn't yelling. A few moments later, she returned. Is everything all right here? I slowly pushed my chair back and stood. The conversations around us faded. Every face at our table turned toward me. My family just made something very clear, I said evenly. I looked first at Brandon, then at my mother. And I'd like to make something clear too. Brandon leaned back with a smirk. Oh, here we go. I won't argue, I replied calmly, because Emma deserves dinner, not a scene. I turned to the server. Could I please order another entree? She nodded immediately. Of course. The lobster dinner, exactly the same as everyone else's. Emma looked up at me. You don't have to, Mom. I know, I whispered. I'm choosing to. The server hurried toward the kitchen, while an uneasy silence settled over the table. Brandon laughed. You always overreact. My mother shook her head. This is why everything becomes dramatic. I ignored them. When Emma's lobster finally arrived, I cut the meat into small pieces for her, while everyone else pretended nothing unusual had happened. The birthday cake was served next. Once again, slices were placed in front of every grandchild. The waitress hesitated before reaching Emma. She looked toward Brandon. He gave the slightest shake of his head. The cake skipped Emma entirely. I guess we only counted the children we paid for, Brandon said with a chuckle. A woman dining 2 tables away lowered her fork and stared openly. A man near the window muttered, You've got to be kidding. I saw the embarrassment on the young server's face. None of it seemed to bother Brandon. Or my mother. Emma quietly folded her hands in her lap. I suddenly remembered every family gathering where she'd received the smallest gift. Every Christmas where Brandon's children opened mountains of presents, while Emma thanked everyone for a single coloring book. Every vacation where there was somehow never room for us. I'd convinced myself staying silent kept the family together. Tonight proved I'd only been teaching my daughter to accept humiliation. Brandon wiped his mouth with a napkin. My restaurant's expansion starts next month anyway, he announced proudly to the table. Lease renewals basically guaranteed. Several relatives congratulated him. I simply looked at him. Then I looked back at Emma. And for the first time all evening, I stopped worrying about keeping the peace. The drive home was quieter than I'd ever known it to be. Emma sat in the back seat with the untouched slice of cake the server had quietly slipped into a takeout box before we left. She hadn't asked for it. The young woman had simply whispered, she shouldn't go home without birthday cake. It was the only kindness my daughter had received that night besides mine. Halfway home, Emma finally spoke. Mom. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. Yes, sweetheart. She hesitated before asking the question I'd been dreading. Are we still part of this family? My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The traffic light ahead turned red, forcing me to stop. I wanted to tell her everything was fine. I wanted to promise her grandma loved her just as much as the other grandchildren. I couldn't. Instead, I turned slightly in my seat. You'll always be part of my family. She nodded slowly. But Grandma's family. I couldn't answer. Emma looked out the window for the rest of the drive. That silence hurt more than anything Brandon had said. After putting Emma to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen washing dishes that didn't need washing. The images kept replaying. The fries. The missing cake. The way Brandon hadn't even looked embarrassed. He'd expected me to accept it. Because I always had. There had been the Christmas when every grandchild received bicycles except Emma, who got a puzzle because, according to my mother, she's too young for an expensive bike. There was the summer trip to the lake, where Brandon rented jet skis for his children, while Emma and I were told we'd probably rather relax. Birthdays. School awards. Holiday photos. Emma was always invited. Just never included. Every time I'd swallowed my pride because I wanted her to know her grandparents. Tonight I finally wondered what exactly I'd been preserving. The next afternoon my mother called. So, she began without greeting me, are you still upset over dinner? I set my coffee mug down. I'm upset that Emma was humiliated. Oh, don't exaggerate. I'm not. It was Brandon's money. It was his invitation. Silence. Then she sighed dramatically. Children need to learn life isn't always fair. I answered quietly. Not from their own family. Before she could respond, another voice came over the phone. Brandon. He must have been at her house. I heard you're still making a big deal out of Lobster. I'm making a big deal out of Emma. He laughed. You're way too sensitive. No. I kept my voice calm. I'm finally paying attention. He ignored that completely. You know what? None of this matters anyway. Oh. My restaurant's expanding next month. His confidence practically filled the phone. The landlord already told us the lease renewal won't be a problem. New dining room, bigger kitchen, second patio. He laughed. It's all basically guaranteed. I didn't answer. Instead, I stared out my kitchen window. Interesting. Very interesting. You still there? Brandon asked. Yes. Nothing to say. No. I smiled to myself. Congratulations. He sounded pleased. I knew you'd come around. He hung up first. I placed my phone on the counter and stood there for a long moment. Emma walked into the kitchen, carrying her backpack. Mom. I looked at her. You ready for school? She nodded. Then she quietly asked, Grandma isn't mad at me, is she? I knelt beside her. None of this is your fault. She wrapped her arms around my neck. I wish they liked me. I held her tightly. So do I. As I watched her leave for school a few minutes later, I made myself a promise. I would never again confuse silence with protection. And for the first time, Brandon's words about that guaranteed lease echoed in my mind with a meaning only I understood. There was just one question left. How long would it take before he discovered the truth? 10 days later, the lobster dinner still hadn't disappeared. Not from people's memories. Not from the internet. I first found out when a coworker walked into my office holding her phone. Mila, she said carefully, Were you at Harbor House Seafood last Saturday? I looked up from my spreadsheet. Why? She hesitated before turning the screen toward me. Someone sitting a few tables away had posted about what they'd witnessed. There was no video, no names, just a detailed account. Tonight, I watched a family order expensive lobster dinners for every grandchild except one little girl. They handed her fries while everyone else ate lobster and cake. I've never seen a child try so hard not to cry. Thousands of people had already shared it. The comments were brutal. That poor little girl. Some people shouldn't call themselves grandparents. I hope that child grows up surrounded by better people. I quietly handed the phone back. I was there. My coworker's face fell. I'm so sorry. So am I. By lunchtime, someone had recognized Brandon from an older photo on his restaurant's social media page. Then someone recognized my mother. The comments became even harsher. Customers started leaving reviews, criticizing the family's behavior rather than the food. No one accused the restaurant of serving bad meals. They questioned the character of the owner. By evening, Brandon's phone calls began. I ignored the first 3. I answered the 4th. What have you done? He demanded without saying hello. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't. This stupid story online. I didn't post anything. You must have told somebody. I didn't. You made this family look disgusting. I took a slow breath. No, Brandon. My family did that themselves. He scoffed. So now you're enjoying this. I'm enjoying spending time with my daughter. You've turned people against us over food. It was never about food. Before he could argue, I ended the call. The next morning, my aunt called. Mila, your mother is beside herself. I'm sure she is. She's asking if you'll tell people the story was exaggerated. It wasn't. She says everyone is judging the family. They're judging what happened. Another pause. Then my aunt quietly admitted. I wasn't there, but if Emma really got fries while everyone else had lobster. She did. Then your mother should be apologizing instead of calling you. For the first time in years, someone in the family hadn't defended Brandon. It didn't fix anything, but it changed something. 3 days later, Brandon's restaurant hosted a media event announcing its upcoming expansion. Photos appeared everywhere. He stood in front of architectural drawings with a huge smile. Our lease extension is already in motion, he proudly told local reporters. We're investing heavily in the future. Behind him were renderings of a larger dining room, an outdoor patio, and a renovated kitchen. Construction companies had already been hired. Suppliers had been contracted. Large deposits had already been paid. Everything depended on that lease renewal. I studied every photo without saying a word. Then I picked up my phone. Good afternoon, I said when the attorney answered. This is Mila Bennett. Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett. I think it's time. I was expecting your call. I'd like to schedule the tenant meeting. I'll arrange it immediately. When? This Friday at 10. Perfect. Friday morning arrived. Brandon walked confidently into the conference room, carrying renovation plans under one arm. He was laughing with his architect. This should be quick, he said. I've basically got this lease wrapped up. He pushed open the conference room door. His smile disappeared instantly. At the far end of the polished table, I was already seated in the chair reserved for the property owner. Brandon stopped in the doorway. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he laughed once. What are you doing here? I closed the folder in front of me. Good morning, Brandon. He looked around the room, as if expecting someone else to explain the joke. His architect shifted uneasily. The property attorney stood and extended a hand. Mr. Bennett, please come in. Brandon walked toward the table without taking his eyes off me. I don't understand. You will. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Instead, he looked directly at the attorney. I thought this meeting was with the owner. It is. The attorney calmly opened a leather portfolio. Mr. Bennett, I'd like to formally introduce Ms. Mila Bennett, the current owner of this commercial property. Silence. Brandon frowned. No. The attorney slid a certified copy of the deed across the table. Ownership transferred 11 days ago. Brandon stared at the document. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. It isn't. He looked at me. You bought this building. I answered evenly. It was transferred to me after Mr. Harold Lawson retired. Brandon shook his head. He never mentioned selling. He wasn't required to. The attorney continued before Brandon could recover. Several years ago, your late brother-in-law, Daniel Bennett, entered into a private investment agreement with Mr. Lawson. Brandon blinked. What agreement? Daniel helped finance major structural repairs after a fire damaged the property. I remembered those long evenings. Daniel had never talked about helping people for recognition. He simply believed promises mattered. The attorney continued. Mr. Lawson retained majority ownership during his lifetime. Upon retirement, he exercised his contractual right to transfer the property to Mr. Bennett's designated beneficiary. He looked toward me. Mrs. Bennett. Brandon slowly sat down. So, his voice had lost its confidence. Daniel left you this. Yes. The paperwork became final 10 days before your mother's birthday dinner. The room fell quiet. Brandon rubbed both hands across his face. I never knew. It wasn't your business to know. The attorney nodded. All negotiations were confidential. Brandon straightened his shoulders, trying to recover. Fine. He forced a smile. Then let's finish the lease. The attorney didn't move. Instead, he opened another file. Before discussing renewal, we must address existing compliance issues. Brandon frowned. What compliance issues? The attorney turned the pages one by one. Rent payments received late on 6 occasions over the past 18 months. Brandon immediately answered. Harold always gave me extra time. He chose not to enforce the clause. Another page. Outdoor patio, constructed without written approval. We had verbal permission. The lease requires written authorization. Another page. 3 documented noise complaints from neighboring tenants. They were never serious. They remain unresolved. Brandon looked at me. You've never cared about paperwork. I folded my hands. This isn't personal. It's business. For the first time since entering the room, Brandon looked nervous. So, he cleared his throat. What happens now? The attorney answered. Automatic renewal is not available while these defaults remain outstanding. Brandon stared. What? You may negotiate a new lease after the violations are resolved. He looked at me again. This is because of dinner. No. This is revenge. No. You waited. I followed the contract. His voice grew sharper. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence. I expect you to understand something. He leaned forward. What? The day you handed my daughter fries, while every other child ate lobster. I met his eyes without raising my voice. You showed me exactly how little fairness meant to you. He looked away first. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. He finally silenced it. Mila. For the first time in years, he used my name without arrogance. I'm sorry. The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. I shouldn't have done that. I said nothing. I'll apologize to Emma. Still nothing. I'll tell Mom she was wrong. The attorney quietly organized his papers while Brandon waited for an answer that didn't come. Outside the conference room, someone knocked once. The attorney looked toward the door. Come in. His assistant entered carrying another folder. She placed it in front of the attorney. He glanced at the first page. Then he looked at Brandon. Before we continue, he gently turned the folder around. There's one more issue we need to address. The attorney opened the new file and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Bennett, during our final review, we discovered an additional matter. Brandon leaned forward. What now? The contractor you hired submitted renovation permits before receiving written authorization from the property owner. Brandon looked confused. We were preparing. The application's state construction was scheduled to begin next week. So, the attorney folded his hands. Under your current lease, beginning work before approval constitutes another default. Brandon's shoulders slumped. I haven't started construction. No, the attorney replied. But your contractor signed agreements and filed permits representing approval that had not been granted. Brandon looked at me desperately. This can be fixed. It can, I answered. He sat a little straighter. I knew it. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. This is the proposal. He grabbed it immediately. The attorney summarized it. All existing lease violations must be corrected. Future rent will reflect current market value. Renovation approvals will follow standard review procedures. Brandon nodded quickly. I can do all of that. There is one final condition. He looked up. What is it? I answered myself. You owe Emma a sincere apology. He blinked. That's all. No excuses. He looked relieved. I'll apologize. You'll apologize because you understand what you did. I said I would. And you'll apologize before we sign anything. For several seconds, he stared at the paper. Then his expression hardened. This is ridiculous. The room became quiet again. You're mixing business with family. I shook my head. You did that. I humiliated a child over dinner. You humiliated your niece. It wasn't that serious. You've spent the last 10 minutes apologizing. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he pushed the proposal back across the table. I'm not letting my lease depend on apologizing over Lobster. It doesn't. I calmly slid the proposal back into my folder. It depends on your willingness to act like a responsible tenant. The attorney closed his file. Without an executed agreement, we cannot renew under the existing lease. Brandon stood abruptly. You'll regret this. No. I stood as well. I'll regret every year I stayed silent while my daughter was treated like she mattered less. He stormed out, slamming the conference room door behind him. Over the following weeks, Brandon tried everything except accepting responsibility. He called repeatedly. I didn't answer. He sent long emails blaming stress, money, and misunderstandings. I referred every business matter to the attorney. Then my mother appeared at my front door. Emma was at school. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Diane looked exhausted. You've gone too far. I don't think I have. He's your brother. And Emma is your granddaughter. She looked away. I never meant to hurt her. You watched it happen. I thought. Her voice broke. I thought she'd forget. I looked at her quietly. Children don't forget who made them feel unwanted. She had no answer. Instead, she whispered, Please don't destroy Brandon's business. I didn't. He'll have to move. He chose that. He said you're punishing him. No. I met her eyes. I'm holding him to the same contract every other tenant would have. She stood silently for a long moment before turning back toward her car. That conversation would be the last one we had for many months. Brandon refused every opportunity to negotiate. He insisted someone else would force me to change my mind. No one did. When the lease expired, he vacated the property. Relocating his restaurant cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars in moving expenses, new construction, marketing, and months of lost revenue. Word spread through the family long before anyone heard it from me. My aunt, who had defended me after the online post, finally asked the question everyone else had avoided. Did Brandon really exclude Emma? Yes. And then refused to apologize. Yes. She shook her head. I would have lost sleep over that. Several relatives admitted they had seen the favoritism for years, but had stayed quiet because confronting Brandon always turned into an argument. One by one, they called. Not to defend him. To apologize. My cousin Sarah visited one Saturday afternoon, carrying a small birthday gift for Emma. I should have spoken up that night. Emma smiled politely. It's okay. Sarah looked at me. No, it wasn't. A month later, Emma and I celebrated her 10th birthday. Not at an expensive seafood restaurant. Not with forced smiles. We rented a small pavilion at the neighborhood park. Her classmates ran across the grass. Parents laughed over hamburgers and homemade desserts. Every child ate the same meal. Every child received the same slice of cake. When it was time to open presents, Emma leaned against me. This is my favorite birthday. I smiled. Why? She looked around at her friends. Nobody forgot me. I kissed the top of her head. No one ever will again. The commercial property remained fully occupied. New tenants signed leases. Business continued exactly as it should. Professionally. Fairly. I never celebrated Brandon's loss. I simply refused to sacrifice my daughter's dignity to preserve someone else's comfort. Emma no longer asked whether she belonged. She already knew the answer. Not because my family had changed. Because I finally had. We built new holiday traditions with people who celebrated her instead of tolerating her. There were no comparisons. No favorites. No empty chair waiting for approval that would never come. Just peace. One evening, months later, Emma slipped her hand into mine as we walked home from dinner. You didn't yell at them. No. But you still protected me. Those were the only words I needed to hear. I couldn't make my family love my daughter, but I could make sure she never had to beg for a seat at their table again.